My brother got everything that should have been mine: the farm, the land, the legacy. I was left with a worthless patch of forest no one wanted. My name is Grayson Baines, and at 25, I thought I knew what loyalty meant. Turns out, I was dead wrong. See, I grew up on a farm that my grandfather built with his bare hands back in 1952. 50 acres of prime Indiana soil that could grow corn so tall you'd lose your truck in it. My dad inherited it, worked it, breathed it. And me? I was supposed to be next in line. At least, that's what I believed my whole life. Every morning since I was 12, I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m., not because someone made me, because the land needed me. While other kids were playing Xbox or chasing girls at the mall, I was learning the difference between good soil and clay that wouldn't grow weeds. I could tell you which field needed more nitrogen just by looking at the corn leaves. I knew every fence post, every drainage ditch, every spot where the tractor got stuck every spring. My brother Jared? Different story entirely. Jared was a golden boy, 3 years older, college-bound, and according to Dad, the future of Baines family farm. He'd show up for Thanksgiving dinner with his fancy girlfriend and stories about business classes. Dad would light up like Christmas morning every time Jared mentioned expanding operations or modernizing equipment. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there with dirt still under my fingernails from working the South Field all week. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate my brother. But watching your dad's face when the golden child walks in verses, when you hand him the daily production reports, that stings worse than a yellow jacket. The irony was thick as molasses. Jared talked about farming like it was some abstract concept he learned from textbooks. I lived it. Every blister, every sunrise. Every year we barely broke even because of weather or commodity prices. When the drought hit in 2019, I was the one sleeping in the fields with sprinkler systems. When we lost 12 head of cattle to that freak storm, I was the one who spent 3 days digging through debris. But Jared, he had the degree, the plan, the vision. Dad got sick in January. A bad illness, the kind that doesn't mess around. Those last 6 months, I practically moved into his bedroom, feeding him, helping him to the bathroom, listening to him worry about the farm's future between his medications. Some nights he'd grab my hand and whisper about keeping the land in the family, about how Grandpa would roll over in his grave if we ever sold to developers. I thought those conversations meant something. I thought they meant I mattered. The funeral was on a Tuesday. By Thursday, we were sitting in Lawyer Johnson's office for the will reading. I remember the smell of old leather and coffee. I remember thinking this was just a formality. We'd figure out how to split things fair. Maybe Jared gets the house and I get the fields. Something that made sense. Then Johnson started reading. Lawyer Johnson kept clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses like the words were stuck. He looked uncomfortable, kept glancing at me like he knew this was going to hit hard, but the papers were crystal clear. No room for contest, no legal loopholes. Nothing I could do except sit there and take it. The farm got split right down the middle, but not fairly. Jared inherited the good portion, the house, the barn, all the equipment in the family savings account, the productive fields, the infrastructure, everything that actually made money. Me, I got the other half, what we'd always called the back 40, even though it was only 25 acres. Dense woods, rocky soil, swampland in the low spots, a section so overgrown we used to joke about sending search parties for anyone brave enough to walk through it. I sat there staring at the legal papers, trying to process what just happened. I'd given my youth to this place, skipped college, skipped life, and for what? A patch of briars and raccoons. Jared didn't even look surprised. He just nodded like he'd been expecting this all along, like we discussed it over Sunday dinner, and I'd somehow missed the memo. After we left the lawyer's office, Jared clapped me on the shoulder like we were buddies. He suggested I could always pitch a tent back there if I want to play Daniel Boone, maybe make friends with the raccoons, and start my own little nature preserve. He laughed when he said it. Not a mean laugh, exactly, but the kind that lets you know someone doesn't take your pain seriously. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some oversight or last-minute decision. This was calculated. While I was measuring Dad's medications and helping him write Christmas cards, Jarrett was measuring something else entirely. I drove home in silence, past fields I'd planted, past fences I'd mended, past a life that apparently was never really mine. Emily was waiting on the porch swing we'd picked out together at the hardware store. She had that look, the one women get when they know bad news is coming but they're hoping they're wrong. Emily Chin had been my girlfriend for 3 years. We met at the county fair when she was visiting her cousin, and somehow this city girl fell for a farmer who smelled like diesel fuel and had permanently stained fingernails. She was different from the local girls. She asked questions about sustainable farming and actually listened to my answers. But when I told her about the will, something shifted behind her eyes. We'd been talking about marriage, about building a house on the farm, about raising kids who'd learn to drive tractors before bicycles. Suddenly, those dreams were sitting on 25 acres of unusable forest. Emily was practical, always had been. She worked in marketing for a company in Fort Wayne, made decent money, understood spreadsheets and 5-year plans. When she looked at my inheritance, she saw what everyone else would see, a consolation prize that couldn't support a family. She tried to be gentle about it, suggested maybe this was a sign, a chance to start fresh somewhere else. She'd been looking at commercial real estate in town. There was a perfect spot for a coffee shop, something trendy that could draw the college crowd from the branch campus. We could sell the land, use the money as startup capital, build something that was ours from the ground up. The more she talked, the more I realized she'd been thinking about this for a while. Maybe she'd never really believed in the farming dream. I wanted to say yes. God knows, sitting in that lawyer's office had shaken everything I thought I knew about my place in the world. But something stubborn in me wouldn't bend. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was just the Baines family trait of being too hard-headed for our own good. I told her I wasn't ready to give up on the land. Not yet. Emily's face went through about 6 different emotions in 10 seconds. Disappointment, frustration, understanding, and finally something that looked like resignation. She loved me, I knew that, but she wasn't going to follow me into what looked like professional suicide. She stayed the night, but we both knew it was goodbye. We talked until sunrise about different definitions of security, about taking risks versus being realistic, about whether love was enough when practical life got complicated. She cried when she packed her car the next morning. So, did I, if I'm being honest. As her taillights disappeared down the gravel drive, I stood there with everything I thought I knew about my future crumbling around me. No farm to run. No fiancé to marry. No clear path forward except those 25 acres of scrub brush that most people would consider worthless. But you know what? Sometimes getting knocked down completely is exactly what you need to figure out who you really are. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. I just didn't know it yet. That afternoon, I walked through my inheritance for the first time. Dense woods, thick underbrush, fallen logs everywhere. But as I pushed deeper into what everyone else saw as worthless land, I started noticing things. The way afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy. The sound of a creek I'd forgotten was back there. Animal tracks in the soft soil near a natural clearing. And something else. Something that would change everything, though I didn't recognize it at the time. My grandfather's old tool trailer was parked at the edge of the property, half hidden by overgrown sumac bushes. I'd forgotten it was even there. Grandpa used to store his hand tools in it during winter, back when the farm was smaller and simpler. The thing was built like a tank, aluminum siding over a steel frame, still waterproof after decades of neglect. Standing there looking at that old trailer, surrounded by land everyone else considered joke, I made a decision that probably seemed crazy to anyone watching. I decided to move in, not because I had a plan, not because I saw some grand opportunity, but because I was too stubborn to quit and too broke to do anything else. I spent the next week making that trailer livable. Cleaned out decades of accumulated junk, fixed the propane connections, got the tiny refrigerator running. 42 square feet of living space, barely room for a bed and a camp stove. But it was mine. Actually mine, not something someone could take away with a rewritten will. My first night in the woods, lying on an air mattress listening to owls and wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. I made myself a promise. I was going to prove them all wrong. Jared, Dad, Emily, everyone who thought I got the short end of the stick. I was going to turn my worthless acres into something that mattered. I just had no idea how. But sometimes the best adventures start with the worst circumstances. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed. And sometimes the land everyone else considers worthless is exactly where you discover your own worth. That's where this story really begins. Living in a trailer in the middle of nowhere changes you. Fast. The first week was rough. Really rough. I'm talking about waking up to raccoons having a party on my roof at 3 a.m., discovering that my water pump decided to quit working right when I needed a shower, and realizing that eating canned beans for every meal gets old by day 4. But somewhere around week 2, something shifted. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way morning fog rolled through the oak trees like something out of a fairy tale. How different birds sang at different times of day. Robins at dawn, cardinals around lunch, owls taking the night shift. The smell of earth after rain, rich and clean in a way that made you want to breathe deeper. Turns out, when you strip away all the noise of modern life, the world has a lot more to say. One rainy Thursday, I was sitting in my tiny trailer listening to water drumming on the aluminum roof, feeling sorry for myself and questioning every life choice I'd ever made. That's when I spotted something I hadn't noticed before, an old wooden crate shoved under what used to be Grandpa's workbench. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had seen better decades, was Grandpa's field journal. Pages and pages of his handwriting, documenting everything from weather patterns to crop rotations to, and this caught my eye, detailed notes about wild mushrooms. I'd completely forgotten that Grandpa was into foraging. Back when I was maybe 8 or 9, he used to take me on walks through these same woods, teaching me to spot different fungi, morel mushrooms in spring, chanterelles in summer, oyster mushrooms growing on dead oak trees. He called it nature's grocery store, said most people walked right past dinner, without even knowing it. Reading his notes brought it all flooding back. The excitement of finding your first morel, the way chanterelles smell like apricots, how lion's mane mushrooms look like something from another planet, but taste better than any seafood you've ever had. Grandpa had mapped out prime mushroom spots all over these 25 acres. He'd noted which trees produced the best specimens, what time of year to look where, even which weather conditions brought out the good stuff. It was like finding buried treasure, except the treasure was knowledge. That weekend, armed with Grandpa's journal and a plastic grocery bag, I went exploring. Holy cow, were there mushrooms everywhere. I'm talking about a fungal paradise hiding in plain sight. Oyster mushrooms cascading down dead elm trees like frozen waterfalls. Clusters of honey mushrooms at the base of dying oaks. And tucked away in a little clearing near the creek, jackpot, a patch of chicken in the woods that had to weigh 15 pounds. I felt like I discovered oil in my backyard, except better, because oil doesn't taste amazing sautéed with butter and garlic. But here's the thing about being broke and living in a trailer. You can't eat 15 pounds of mushrooms before they go bad. So I did what any rational person would do. I loaded up my beat-up pickup truck and headed to town to see if anyone wanted to buy them. First stop, the grocery store. The produce manager looked at me like I was trying to sell him moon rocks. Apparently, they don't buy random mushrooms from random guys, even if those guys are absolutely certain their fungi aren't poisonous. Strike one. Second stop, the farmer's market. But it was Tuesday, and the farmer's market only happens on Saturdays. The empty parking lot felt like a metaphor for my life choices. Strike two. Third stop, Murphy's Diner, the kind of place where truckers stop for coffee that could strip paint and pie that makes you forgive the coffee. The owner, a guy named Bill who'd run the place since dinosaurs roamed the earth, took one look at my mushrooms and shook his head. He wasn't being mean about it. He just explained that restaurants have rules about where they buy their ingredients. Health department regulations, liability issues, the whole 9 yards. Can't blame a guy for following the law. Strike three. I was officially out. But sometimes getting rejected by everyone forces you to think outside the box. Driving home with a truck full of mushrooms that were getting more expensive by the hour, I stopped at Murphy's one more time. Not to sell anything, just to grab a coffee and figure out my next move. That's when I overheard a conversation that would shift everything. This guy at the counter was complaining to Bill about how hard it was to find good wild mushrooms for his restaurant. Apparently, he was a chef at some upscale place in Fort Wayne, and his supplier had flaked out on him. Now, I'm not usually the type to eavesdrop on strangers' conversations, but desperate times and all that, I waited until he was walking to his car, then approached him with what I hoped was my most professional smile and least crazy demeanor. Turns out his name was Marcus, and he'd gone to high school with me. Different grades, but small-town high school means you at least recognize everyone. He remembered me as the farm kid who never came to parties because I had to get up early to feed cattle. When I showed him my mushrooms, his whole attitude transformed. He picked up a piece of the chicken of the woods, smelled it, examined the texture. His eyes lit up like I'd just shown him winning lottery tickets. Marcus explained that good wild mushrooms were like gold in the restaurant business. Customers would pay premium prices for dishes made with forage ingredients, especially when they were locally sourced and sustainably harvested. The problem was finding reliable suppliers who knew what they were doing. He bought everything I had, paid me cash on the spot, $240 for a morning's work. I'd made more money in that parking lot conversation than I usually made in a week of farm labor. But more importantly, Marcus asked if I could supply him regularly. He gave me his card and told me to call him the next time I found anything good. He also mentioned that he had chef friends at other restaurants who were always looking for quality wild mushrooms. Marcus warned me I might need a forager's license if I wanted to scale up, something I hadn't even considered. Driving home with empty mushroom containers and a pocket full of cash, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A glimmer of purpose. Real, honest-to-goodness direction that maybe I wasn't completely screwed after all. That night, I sat in my trailer reading Grandpa's journal by lamplight, making plans. If this land could produce enough mushrooms to make a living, maybe I had stumbled onto something bigger than just survival. The next few weeks became a crash course in mycology, business, and humility. I learned that mushroom identification is serious business. Make one mistake, and you could poison someone. So I bought every field guide I could afford, joined online forums, and even drove 3 hours to attend a mushroom identification workshop at a state park. Getting the forager's license turned out to be easier than I expected. Just a written test about safe harvesting practices and a small annual fee. Nothing like the bureaucratic nightmare I'd imagined. With my first few sales, I bought a second-hand solar panel kit and rigged up a rainwater catchment system. Still rough living, but better than week one. At least now I had LED lights and could charge my phone without driving to town. I also learned that finding mushrooms is only half the battle. You need to harvest them properly, store them correctly, and get them to customers while they're still fresh. Mushrooms are divas. They don't keep well, and they definitely don't like being bounced around in the back of a pickup truck. I invested in a small cooler, some mesh bags, and a proper foraging knife. Nothing fancy, but tools that showed I was taking this seriously. But the biggest lesson? Failure is a hell of a teacher. I lost entire batches to improper storage. I misidentified what I thought were honey mushrooms and had to throw away $50 worth of what turned out to be something inedible. I showed up to meet Marcus with mushrooms that looked like they'd been through a blender. Each mistake stung, but each one also taught me something essential: how to pack delicate specimens, which mushrooms transported well, and which ones needed to be delivered the same day they were picked, how to keep my mouth shut when customers complain about prices, until I learned to explain the work that went into foraging. Slowly, word started getting around. Marcus recommended me to another chef. That chef mentioned me to someone else. A local health food store started buying my oyster mushrooms. A fancy restaurant in Indianapolis called asking if I could supply them with ramps in the spring. I wasn't getting rich, but I was paying my bills. More importantly, I was doing something that felt worthwhile. something that connected me to this land in a way that raising corn and soybeans never had. The loneliness was real, though. There were nights when the silence got so thick you could almost touch it. Nights when I'd look at Grandpa's old photo on the trailer's tiny shelf and have one-sided conversations about whether I was making the right choices. The worst was when storms rolled through, rain hammering the trailer roof. Sounded like the world was ending. Wind would shake the whole structure until I wondered if I'd wake up in Kansas like Dorothy. Those nights, I'd lie awake questioning everything, wondering if Emily had been right about moving to town and starting over. But then morning would come. The storm would pass. I'd step outside to find new mushrooms that appeared overnight, like little gifts from the forest floor. And I'd remember why I was doing this. It wasn't just about proving everyone wrong, though that was definitely part of it. It was about discovering that the land everyone else considered worthless was actually incredibly precious. You just had to know how to see it. By the end of my second month in the woods, I had a routine. Wake up at dawn, check my known mushroom spots, harvest anything ready, package and deliver orders, then spend afternoons exploring new areas and documenting what I found. Evenings were for studying field guides, updating my own notes, and planning the next day's foraging routes. It sounds simple, but it was the hardest I'd ever worked, and the most satisfied I'd ever felt doing it. I was starting to understand what Grandpa meant when he called the woods nature's grocery store. But it was more than that. It was nature's pharmacy, nature's classroom, nature's therapy session, all rolled into one. Every day taught me something new about the interconnectedness of everything growing out there. Mushrooms, I learned, are like the internet of the forest. Underground networks of fungal threads connect trees and plants, sharing nutrients and information across vast distances. When you harvest mushrooms, you're only taking the fruit. The real organism is this massive underground web that you can't even see. It felt like a metaphor for my own situation. Everyone saw the surface, a guy living in a trailer on worthless land. But underneath, something much more complex and significant was taking root. Then one morning in late October, while checking my favorite honey mushroom spot, I found something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the creek. Someone had been driving back here, and recently. At first, I panicked. Was someone stealing my mushrooms? Had Jared decided to check on his crazy brother living in the woods? But then I noticed something else. The tracks led to a small clearing I'd never explored, and there were boot prints around what looked like a makeshift campsite. There's no gate at the edge of my land, just a narrow service trail Grandpa used to take the tractor through. Anyone could wander in without realizing they'd crossed onto private property, especially if they were trying to reach the state hiking trail that borders my back fence. Curiosity got the better of me. Following the tracks, I discovered that someone had been using my land as a shortcut to reach the popular hiking trail on the adjacent state property. They'd been camping overnight, probably fishing in the creek, and from the looks of it, having a pretty good time doing it. The weird part? They'd been incredibly respectful. No trash, no damage to trees. Even their fire pit was properly constructed and completely extinguished. Whoever these people were, they knew how to enjoy nature without destroying it. That's when the idea hit me. An idea so simple and obvious that I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it before. If my land was producing income through mushrooms, and if people were already drawn to it for recreation, maybe there was a way to combine those two things. Maybe I could create something that would generate revenue while sharing what I'd learned about the hidden treasures growing in these woods. I spent the rest of that day walking my property with new eyes, seeing it not just as a source of mushrooms, but as a potential destination, a place where people could come to learn about foraging, to experience the peace I found in these woods, to disconnect from their busy lives, and reconnect with something authentic. It was a crazy idea, probably impossible, definitely risky. But as I sat in my trailer that evening, watching the sunset through the oak trees and listening to the creek babble in the distance, I realized something important. I'd already taken the biggest risk of my life by moving out here. Everything from this point forward was just building on that foundation. Turns out, roots don't need sunlight to grow strong. Some of the deepest ones form underground, in silence. And mine were just getting started. 3 months into my woodland adventure, I thought I had things figured out. Decent mushroom income, a routine that worked, and enough solar power to keep my phone charged. Life was simple, predictable. Then Sarah Martinez called. Sarah was someone I'd known from agriculture extension classes back when I thought my future was in conventional farming. She'd always been the type who saw opportunities where other people saw problems. Turns out, she started a small business organizing farm tours and agricultural experiences for city folks wanting to reconnect with rural life. The conversation started innocently enough. She'd heard through the grapevine about my mushroom operation and wondered if I'd be interested in hosting a small group. Nothing fancy, just a handful of people who wanted to learn about foraging while getting away from their screens for a weekend. My first instinct was to say no. I was barely keeping my own operation afloat, and the idea of entertaining strangers felt overwhelming. But Sarah had a way of making things sound reasonable when they probably weren't. Plus, she offered to pay me $300 for a half-day experience. That was more than I made from mushroom sales in 3 good days. So I said yes. Biggest decision I'd made since moving into the woods, though I had no idea at the time. The group arrived on a Saturday morning in October. 8 people total, ranging from young professionals to retirees, all looking slightly out of place in their brand new hiking boots and outdoor gear that still had price tags. City folks try to look outdoorsy always amuse me, but these people seemed genuinely excited to be there. I'd spent the previous week cleaning up the trails, marking the best mushroom spots, and practicing what I was going to say. Turns out, talking to people about mushrooms when you're passionate about the subject is a lot easier than you'd think. We started at the creek, where I showed them oyster mushrooms growing on a fallen log. The way their faces lit up when they spotted their first wild edible was something else, like they discovered buried treasure, which in a way they had. One woman, probably in her 50s, kept taking pictures of everything. Every mushroom, every tree, even me explaining the difference between safe and dangerous fungi. She said she wanted to show her grandkids that food didn't just come from grocery stores. But the real game changer was this young guy in the back of the group who seemed more interested in filming than foraging. Jonathan Levy, mid-20s, carrying professional camera equipment that probably cost more than my truck. He introduced himself as a food blogger and YouTuber, said he was always looking for unique content about local food sources. At first, I figured he'd shoot a few minutes of footage and forget about it. Most people's attention spans for mushroom hunting maxes out around the 30-minute mark. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Jonathan filmed everything. Me explaining how to identify chicken of the woods. The group's excitement when we found a massive cluster of honey mushrooms. Even the quiet moments when people were just walking to the forest, soaking in the peace you can only find among old trees. He asked thoughtful questions about sustainable harvesting, about the connection between land management and food production, about why someone would choose this lifestyle over conventional farming. Questions that made me think deeper about what I was actually doing out here. After the group left, Jonathan hung around for another hour, getting additional footage and asking if he could come back sometime to do a more in-depth piece. I figured, sure, why not? Free publicity couldn't hurt. 3 weeks later, he sent me a link to the video he'd posted. The title read, America's Best Wild Mushrooms, Found in an Indiana Forest. And the thumbnail showed me holding a massive chicken of the woods mushroom with the biggest smile I'd probably worn in months. I watched the whole thing twice, barely recognizing myself. Jonathan had somehow made my rambling explanation sound profound, my scraggly beard look intentional, and my operation look like something people might actually want to experience for themselves. The video started picking up views. Slowly at first, then faster. By the end of the first week, it had hit 100,000 views. By the end of the second week, 500,000. Then something incredible happened. It went viral. I woke up one morning to find my phone buzzing nonstop with missed calls and text messages. Jonathan had sent me a link with a message that just said, "Holy crap, dude, check this out." The video had exploded overnight. 2.4 million views and climbing. Comments were pouring in from all over the country. People sharing their own foraging stories, asking questions about mushroom identification, and most importantly, asking if they could visit. For a couple weeks, I tried to limit it. One tour every Saturday. But the emails kept coming faster than I could answer them. My inbox looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Messages from people wanting to book tours, from other YouTubers asking to collaborate, from magazines wanting to write articles, even a few restaurants inquiring about bulk mushroom orders. I sat in my trailer that morning, phone in one hand and coffee in the other, trying to process what was happening. 2 months earlier, I was a guy living in the woods selling mushrooms to a handful of local chefs. Now I had hundreds of people wanting to experience what I'd built. The problem was, I hadn't built anything to handle thousands of people. I had 25 acres, a trail system that could barely accommodate 8 people, and living quarters that would make a college dorm room look spacious. But you know what they say about opportunity knocking. Sometimes it doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks down your door and demands immediate attention. I spent the next week fielding calls and emails, trying to figure out how to turn viral fame into something sustainable. The requests were coming in faster than I could respond to them. Weekend tours, weekday experiences, multi-day camping trips, corporate team-building events. People were willing to pay serious money for what I was offering. Sarah helped me write a simple website. Her cousin did photography. My old classmate lent me a post-hole digger and sometime on weekends. The math was both exciting and terrifying. If I could handle even a fraction of the demand, I could make more money in a month than I made all year selling mushrooms. But scaling up would require infrastructure I didn't have and money I didn't possess. That's when I made another one of those decisions that seemed crazy at the time, but felt absolutely necessary. I drove into town and walked into First National Bank to apply for a business loan. Explaining my situation to the loan officer was surreal. 6 months earlier, I'd been the guy who got the worst inheritance in family history. Now I was asking to borrow $25,000 to build tourist infrastructure on what everyone had thought was worthless land. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Carol who'd known my family for years, looked at the YouTube video, scrolled through some of the comments, and asked to see my recent income statements. When I showed her the mushroom sales receipts and the booking requests that were still pouring in, her attitude shifted. She approved the loan, not because my collateral was great or because my credit score was perfect, but because she could see that people genuinely wanted what I was offering. Sometimes the best business plan is proof that customers are already lining up. I registered the LLC, got basic liability coverage, and printed some waiver forms. It wasn't glamorous, but it let me sleep better at night. With $25,000 and more determination than sense, I started building. First priority was creating proper trails that could handle more foot traffic without damaging the ecosystem. I spent 2 weeks with a chainsaw and hand tools, clearing paths that would let groups move through the forest safely while still feeling like they were having an authentic wilderness experience. Next came infrastructure. Sarah's brother-in-law helped me build a covered pavilion near the creek where groups could gather for introductions and wrap-up discussions. Nothing fancy, just pressure-treated lumber and a metal roof, but it gave the operation a more professional feel. The real innovation was the outdoor classroom. I found a natural clearing about halfway through the main trail and created a teaching station with log benches arranged in a semicircle around a demonstration area. We built a drying shed using Grandpa's old plans, complete with adjustable racks and proper ventilation. Visitors loved seeing the entire cycle from forest floor to finished product. It wasn't just about mushrooms anymore. It was about memory, meaning, and making something last. But the piece that really tied everything together was the story. I realized that people weren't just coming for mushrooms. They were coming for proof that second chances exist. They wanted to hear about someone who'd lost everything and found a way to rebuild using resources everyone else had overlooked. They didn't just learn to forage. They learned to pay attention again. My tours became part mushroom hunting, part life philosophy, and part demonstration that the American dream is still alive for people willing to look beyond conventional definitions of success. I started incorporating lessons about seeing potential in forgotten places, about the difference between what land costs and what it's worth, about how traditional knowledge can solve modern problems. The groups kept coming. Weekends booked solid through the rest of fall and into winter. I had to start keeping a waiting list. Food bloggers, nature photographers, families looking for unique experiences, even some executives using foraging tours as unconventional team-building exercises. Each group was different, but they all left with the same expression, like they discovered something valuable they didn't know they were looking for. The mushroom sales kept growing too. Word of mouth from tour participants led to new restaurant customers. Chefs who'd never heard of wild Indiana mushrooms were calling to place orders. A gourmet grocery chain in Chicago wanted to carry my dried varieties. What started as a desperate attempt to make rent money had evolved into something that looked suspiciously like a real business. Someone mentioned that Jared had seen the video. I hadn't talked to him since the Will reading, but part of me knew I'd hear from him eventually. Success has a way of making people reconsider their previous opinions. For now, though, I was too busy to worry about family drama. By December, I had enough booking scheduled for the following year to pay off the bank loan early. I was sleeping better than I had since Dad got sick. For the first time since the Will reading, I felt like I was building something that would last. My little patch of forgotten forest had become the foundation for everything I'd never known I wanted. But success has a way of attracting attention from unexpected places, and not all attention is welcome. I was about to learn that proving everyone wrong comes with its own set of complications, especially when the people you're proving wrong happen to be family. Some stories take unexpected turns just when you think you've got everything figured out. This was about to be one of those stories. Success is funny. It makes people see you differently, but more importantly, it makes them remember you exist. I was wrapping up a tour on a crisp February afternoon when I spotted a familiar car parked at the edge of my property. Blue Honda Civic with a small dent in the rear bumper from where she'd backed into a mailbox 3 years ago. My stomach dropped. Emily. She was leaning against the car, arms crossed, watching our group emerge from the woods. The tourists were chattering excitedly about the winter mushrooms they'd found, completely oblivious to the personal drama unfolding 20 feet away. After the group loaded into their van and drove off, Emily walked over. She looked good, professional. Her hair was shorter, and she was wearing the kind of coat that suggested city living had been treating her well financially. We stood there for a moment. Two people who used to know everything about each other now measuring the distance that had grown between us. She broke the silence first, asked if we could talk, said she'd been following the YouTube coverage, had seen articles about my operation in the Indianapolis Star and even Food Network's website. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they're trying not to seem too interested in something they're definitely interested in. I invited her to the pavilion, made coffee on the camp stove I kept there for tours. She sat on one of the log benches, looking around at what I'd built with an expression I couldn't quite read. The first 20 minutes were awkward as hell. Small talk about the weather, mutual acquaintances, how her marketing job was going. Neither of us mentioned the elephant in the room, how she walked away when things got hard, or how I'd essentially bet my entire future on land she considered worthless. Then she started crying, not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears that she tried to wipe away when she thought I wasn't looking. She told me she'd made a mistake. That leaving had been the worst decision of her life. But she'd been scared. Scared of poverty. Scared of isolation. Scared of betting her future on something that seemed impossible. She said she'd spent the last year watching me prove everything she'd been afraid to believe. I wanted to be angry. Part of me had been rehearsing this conversation for months, imagining all the things I'd say about loyalty and trust and sticking with someone when things get tough. But sitting there looking at her, all that anger just felt exhausting. Instead, I told her about the first night in the trailer, how I'd lain awake, wondering if she'd been right about everything, how there were mornings when I'd wake up and think about driving to Fort Wayne to apologize and ask if her coffee shop idea was still on the table. She laughed through her tears when I mentioned the coffee shop, said she'd actually looked into it seriously after we broke up, but every business plan she wrote fell hollow, like she was trying to build something to fill a space that could only be filled by the things she'd walked away from. We talked until the sun started setting, about dreams deferred and chances taken, about the difference between loving someone and trusting them. about whether forgiveness is something you give or something you earn. I didn't forgive her that day. That would have been too easy, and neither of us deserved easy. But I invited her to come back the following weekend, told her she could help with a tour if she wanted, see what the operation actually looked like from the inside. She said yes, and for the first time in our conversation, her smile looked like the one I remembered. Emily came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, but it wasn't smooth sailing. In those first months after her return, we argued about everything: business decisions, personal boundaries, whether we were partners or just two people who happened to be working together. Some nights she'd sleep in her car rather than stay in the cabin I'd built for her. Other nights we'd talk until dawn, testing whether we could trust each other again. She helped with tours, took photographs of the website, started suggesting improvements to how we handle bookings and customer service. Turns out, marketing experience is incredibly useful when you're trying to turn a viral moment into a sustainable business. She was good at things I was terrible at: social media management, customer relationship building, creating packages that appealed to different demographics. I was good at things she couldn't do: identifying mushrooms, reading the forest, connecting with people who needed to hear that second chances actually exist. 6 months after her first visit back, I asked if she wanted to make this arrangement official. Not the personal stuff. We were still figuring that out. But the business partnership. She'd been commuting from Fort Wayne every weekend, using vacation days to help with weekday tours, essentially living two lives. She quit her job a month later. We spent the spring planning something bigger than either of us could have built alone. The Hidden Acre, part eco farm, part coffee roastery, part educational center. We'd serve locally sourced food, roast coffee beans, offer foraging classes, and create a space where people could experience what sustainable living actually looked like. The coffee roastery was Emily's baby. She sourced beans from small farms, created custom blends, and designed a space that felt like a combination coffee house and natural history museum. People could drink excellent coffee while learning about sustainable forestry and mycology. The educational center became my favorite part. We offered weekend workshops on everything from mushroom identification to permaculture design to traditional food preservation. Kids could learn where food actually comes from. Adults could disconnect from screens and reconnect with skills their grandparents had taken for granted. We hired 2 local guys to help with construction and grounds maintenance. Mark is recommended as chef who'd been looking for a change from restaurant life. Some folks in town were supportive. Others said I'd gotten lucky. But most just wanted to book a spot on the next weekend tour. But the real magic happened when people realized they were learning more than just practical skills. They were learning to see abundance in places they'd previously seen scarcity. Learning that with the right knowledge and patience, almost any piece of land could provide value. That's when Jared showed up. I was teaching a foraging class on a Thursday morning in late August when I spotted him walking down the main trail. He looked different. Older, more tired than I remembered. His usual confident swagger had been replaced by something that looked like uncertainty. He waited until the class was over before approaching. Said he'd been meaning to visit for months, had been hearing things about what I was doing out here. His tone was careful, respectful in a way that told me he wasn't here to offer advice or criticism. We walked a pavilion, where Emily was updating the booking calendar on her laptop. She nodded politely when I introduced them, but I could tell she was studying his face, trying to read his intentions. Jared looked around at the infrastructure we'd built. The trails full of happy customers. The parking area where cars with license plates from 6 different states were lined up. He asked thoughtful questions about the business model, about seasonality, about how we handled permits and insurance. Then he got to the real reason for his visit. His farm was struggling, had been for 2 years. Commodity prices were down, weather had been unpredictable, and he borrowed heavily to expand operations right before the market turned. He was looking at bankruptcy unless something changed quickly. He'd come to ask if I consider a partnership. He had the good farmland and traditional agricultural knowledge. I had the tourism operation and marketing momentum. Maybe together we could create something that combined conventional farming with agritourism in a way that would save his operation and expand mine. I looked at my brother, really looked at him for the first time since Dad's funeral. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was just a guy who'd made some bad bets and was trying to figure out how to recover. Someone who'd realized that being smart and educated and favored doesn't protect you from failure if you don't also have resilience and adaptability. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year earlier, I'd been the failure. Now he was asking me to help save the inheritance that had once seemed so much more valuable than mine. I told him I'd think about it, that Emily and I would discuss the possibilities and get back to him. He nodded, shook my hand, and thanked me for considering it. As he walked back to his truck, I realized that my anger toward him had mostly evaporated. Success had given me something more valuable than revenge. It had given me perspective. That night, Emily and I talked through the pros and cons of partnering with Jared. The business advantages were obvious: more land, diversified revenue streams, the ability to offer farm-to-table experiences. But the personal complications were equally obvious. In the end, we decided to make a counteroffer. We'd lease some of his fields to expand our educational programming, but we wouldn't merge operations. We'd help him develop his own agritourism offerings, share marketing resources, and create packages that utilize both properties. But the hidden acre would remain independent. It was a way to help without losing what we built, a way to strengthen family relationships without sacrificing hard-won autonomy. Jared accepted. 3 months later, he was offering tractor tours and farm dinners that complemented our foraging experiences. Families could spend a weekend learning about both traditional agriculture and sustainable wildcrafting. The collaboration worked better than any of us had expected. Once I proved the land's potential, I had the deed formally transferred into my name. Jared didn't object. I think part of him was relieved that someone in the family was making the back 40 productive. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was personal. We rebuilt our relationship as equals instead of as the favorite son and the disappointment. A year after Emily's return, we got invited to speak at the Midwest Agro-Innovation Summit in Chicago. 300 farmers, agricultural extension agents, and rural development specialists wanted to hear about our model. I spent the week before the conference pacing around the cabin, convinced I had nothing valuable to say to people who'd been farming longer than I'd been alive. What did I know about agriculture that they didn't already know better? Emily found me the night before we left, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing my speech for the 10th time. She sat on the bed and reminded me that our story wasn't about expertise. It was about innovation, persistence, and the courage to try something different when conventional approaches weren't working. I looked at my reflection and saw someone I barely recognized. The desperate guy living in a trailer had been replaced by someone who looked confident, purposeful, grounded. Someone who'd learned that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the foundation success gets built on. I looked down at my hands, still calloused, still dirty, but no longer empty. The presentation went better than I dared to hope. We talked about diversification, about finding value in overlooked resources, about building businesses that connected people to the land instead of extracting value from it. During the presentation, I shared our core philosophy. We don't just grow mushrooms. We grow perspective. The audience asked thoughtful questions about scaling, about replication, about policy changes that could support similar operations. But the moment that meant the most came during the Q&A, when an older farmer from Wisconsin stood up and said our story had given him hope, that he'd been considering selling his family farm to developers, but now he was thinking about what hidden potential his own land might contain. That night, back in our hotel room, Emily and I talked about how far we'd come. A local investor had estimated our business could be worth over $3 million on paper, but the real value wasn't measurable in dollars. We'd learned to trust each other again, to build something together that was stronger than what either of us could have created alone. She was 3 months pregnant. We'd been talking about marriage, about building a house on the property, about raising kids who grow up understanding where food comes from and how to find abundance in unexpected places. The slice of pie that nobody wanted had turned out to be the sweetest. The inheritance that had seemed like an insult had turned out to be the greatest gift my father could have given me. Not because the land itself was valuable, but because it forced me to discover what I was capable of when everything else was stripped away. We drove home through farmland that looked exactly like I had when I was growing up, but my perspective on all of it had changed completely. Every patch of woods beside the highway looked like potential. Every abandoned lot seemed to whisper possibilities. I understood now what Grandpa had meant when he called the forest nature's grocery store. But it was more than that. It was nature's classroom, nature's therapy session, nature's reminder that abundance exists everywhere if you know how to look for it. The business kept growing. Our mushroom products were now carried in specialty stores across the Midwest. The educational center was booked solid through the following year. Food Network wanted to film a segment about our operation. But the best part was simpler than any of that. Emily and I had learned to see magic in ordinary moments. Morning coffee in the woods. The excitement on a kid's face when they found their first morel. The sound of laughter echoing through trees that had witnessed generations of Bain's family history. Jared stopped by the other day with news that his farm was not only stable but expanding. He'd paid off his debts, upgraded his equipment, and was planning to pass the operation to his own kid someday. The collaboration had saved him, but more importantly, it had taught him that success isn't just about having the best land or the most resources. It's about adapting when circumstances change. We sat on Emily's porch, drinking coffee from our own roastery and watching our employees help a tour group identify edible plants. Brothers again, but this time as equals. As I write this, I can see the foundation for our new house taking shape at the edge of the meadow. Emily picked the spot because of its views of both the forest and the fields, a reminder that our lives now encompass both wild spaces and cultivated ones. Our baby is due in the spring, around the time the morels start emerging. We've already decided that part of their education will include learning to read the forest the way their great-grandfather taught me to read the soil. People sometimes ask if I ever regret the path that brought me here. If I wish I'd inherited the farmland instead of the forest. If I resent the years of struggle and uncertainty that preceded the success. The answer is always no. The farmland would have given me a living, but the forest gave me a life. The easy inheritance would have sustained me, but the challenging one transformed me. I learned that not everything that looks neglected has been forgotten. Sometimes you have to venture beyond the obvious to find the extraordinary. Sometimes the land that gets laughed at is now the one they study. Not everything that appears abandoned has been discarded. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone with a vision to see its hidden potential. I'm not the same person who moved into that trailer over 2 years ago. I'm not bitter about the past or anxious about the future. I've learned to find abundance in places where other people see scarcity, to build community in spaces where others see isolation. Most importantly, I've learned that success isn't measured only in dollars or acres or market share. It's measured in the depth of your relationships, the sustainability of your impact, and the legacy you're building for the people who come after you. The forest taught me that the most valuable growth happens slowly, underground, where nobody can see it. That the strongest trees are the ones that learn to bend without breaking. That ecosystems thrive not because of competition, but because of cooperation. These aren't just lessons about trees and mushrooms. They're lessons about life, about resilience, about finding your place in the world when the place you thought was yours gets taken away. My land is worth millions now, but I'll never sell it. This isn't real estate anymore. It's home. It's a legacy I'm building for children who will grow up understanding that abundance doesn't come from taking everything you can get, but from nurturing what you have until it flourishes. The patch of forgotten forest turned out to be the only inheritance that mattered. Sometimes the thing that breaks your heart is exactly what you need to build a life that will heal it. And that's how what everyone called a consolation prize became the greatest gift I ever received.